Welcome to You Can Trust Yourself with Meg and Maggie. Nothing feels as good as listening to your own voice, and each week we have conversations to help you do just that. Get comfy, grab your favorite fun drink, and let's dive into this week's episode.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to You Can Trust Yourself podcast, season 3, episode 2. We hope you enjoyed episode 1. It felt so good to get our episodes back out there in the world and to start connecting with you all again. And so if you haven't listened to season 3, episode 1, or honestly season 1 or 2, just go on back and dive through it all. But here we are recording our second episode of this season, and we are so excited to bring you today's topic. So today we're going to be talking about trusting ourselves with health, and in particular, trusting ourselves with our health when it comes to people like professionals in the medical field. So whether that be somebody who is in a position of authority, right? Doctors, nurse practitioners, therapists, whoever it may be, the world of health, specifically surrounding people who most likely have more education than ourselves, and that kind of like power differential between, okay, well, you know more than me, so I should definitely just listen to you. We want to have a conversation just encouraging, of course, opinions of others, especially those who know more than us in some ways, is really important. And we also really need to be in tune with ourselves and be able to listen to ourselves through those decisions. So we're going to dive into that today. I'm kind of the one who brought this to Maggie because I'm going through my own health journey right now, if you will. And so it's led a lot of doctor's appointments and different things. And so a lot has naturally come up for me. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate in this way as well. So Maggie, we're going to just jump on in. Is there anything off the top of your head already that you feel like is what you're excited about to have this conversation?
Yeah, definitely. I think that this is something that we are all kind of continuously going through, right? And I think it applies outside of just healthcare, right? But we can use that example because it's very relevant and easy to explain,
Sure.
I think. But
Mm-hmm.
we're always in a situation where we have to get advice, opinions, professional opinions from other people. And we always have to take that and see how it lands with us, right? Like, is
Mm-hmm.
it what this person's saying, what I feel like is truly best for me in this moment? And it's such a hard distinction to make. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
excited to just share some of the ways that we do that because I feel like it's not something that you're ever perfect with, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
nuances continuously change, but we're able to get a little bit better at it each time and
Mm-hmm.
figure out, how our bodies talk to us and,
Mm-hmm.
figure out what is good for us and what maybe is a great idea but isn't great for us in the moment.
Sure. And I'm so happy that you highlighted that it's not easy and we're probably never going to be perfect at it. And it kind of makes me want to start this episode with like a funny-ish story. Funny now in the moment, not so funny for me to experience very recently as of last week. And it'll really highlight the fact that like we are very, very comfortable with ourselves, right? That's why this podcast exists. We're really good at trusting ourselves. And we're really not perfect at it, and it's so, so hard to do. Okay, so I want to share this quick, funny-ish story. So last week, I'm waiting on test results from the doctor, right? I get my blood work done, and I got hormone testing done, which I'll save that for the end of the episode, which was very hard to get them to do that. I still haven't gotten the results for that, but I'm waiting for results from blood work, right? And something that you have to know about me is that even though I'm a therapist in training and I come on here, I'm a human first, and I really, really struggle with anxieties around my health. It has gotten so much better. I have worked through a lot of it, and it still shows up a lot of times when I'm in a season of going through my health. It's my own, one of my biggest fears is health and something being wrong and getting a call and all these kinds of things, right? So my anxiety level is already slightly elevated, just knowing that I'm going to be getting these test results back soon and not knowing what the heck they might be, right? Because I try and get blood work every year, but things can change in a year. And so I get a call from the lab and they said, you need to make an appointment right away. It's urgent. You need to come in so they can go over your diagnosis and treatment. So my immediate reaction was, oh my gosh, this is my worst nightmare coming through. Like, right? Like, this is for someone who struggles so much with anxiety around my health, having someone call and say, you need to get into this office because we need to go over things with you now, was instant panic mode. Okay? All the tools, all the therapy mag, all that stuff, all that wonderful stuff goes right out the window, and I'm the most human of humans that we can get, right? Full freaking panic mode. And so now I'm just like, well, when can I get in? Well, we don't have anything today. We'll talk soon, right? So I'm like, oh my gosh. So now I'm angry and anxious, which is a horrible combination. Okay. It's a horrible combination. So I'm stomping around my house, panicky, angry, like, how dare you make me so scared? Oh, and you can't see me, right? So now I got to sit. Here's the other thing. It's really hard for us people who can run anxious. Oh, you want me to sit with this feeling? You don't want to give me answers? Now,
You mean you
now
can't fix it right now?
you can't fix it right now? How dare you leave an anxious person to sit with their anxiety, right? It's torture. Anybody who's anxious, I know you're probably like, oh my gosh, yes. Um, And so I'm stomping around my house all morning. I'm on the course to have a really bad day, right? I'm just there now. I'm upset and scared and worried, and I can't do anything about it. I'm in an unknown place. So I'm stomping all around, and I get to my car to go to a workout class. And I want to say that it's growth that comes over me. And I said, okay, you have two choices, Meg. You can keep going through this day mad, which honestly would be perfectly fine. It's justified. I'm worried, whatever. Like, have a bad day, stomp around, go do your workout class, do it angry. Who cares? Like, I believe in letting all the emotions exist. And if that's how I wanted to proceed with my day, let's proceed with our day that way, right? But growing Meg, and Meg who is learning how to manage her own anxiety and help her clients at the same time, said, okay, you know that this is really hard for you because there's a lot of unknowns right now. And that is really hard for anyone, but specifically someone who may run on the more anxious side, right? So you have two choices. You can keep going through your day like this. Totally fine. Go ahead. Go for it. Or you can truly build your tolerance to understanding that you're anxious right now and being mad isn't going to fix it. There's nothing you can do right now. You can't march into the doctor's office. I mean, you could, but if I want to remain hinged and not become unhinged, I have to sit with this. And so I made the decision in that moment to put it on hold and trust. Here we go. Here's the podcast. I had to, in real time, in real life, trust myself enough to know that whatever the results are and whatever scary or not scary thing may come, I trust myself enough to deal with it then. Right? So whenever I get to the doctors and whenever I can finally have a conversation with someone, I will be able to trust myself in that moment to then do whatever I need to do.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. It is powerful to be able to hear real-time stories, and especially since you're able to laugh about it a little bit now, I feel like it makes it a little bit more digestible. But one of the main things that I'm hearing that I want to ask you about is, it sounds to me like you're saying you were able to differentiate between what factors were in your control and what factors were out of your control, right? So
Mm-hmm.
not getting an appointment with the doctor that very minute was out of your control, right?
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that you will get an appointment with the doctor and you will get, the answers you're looking for is
Mm-hmm.
something that is great to know, right? Like, that's a good piece of information.
Sure.
And in that moment, the only thing you're able to control is how you respond to it. right? That's the only thing that you're able to control in that moment. So, what I'm curious about is now you have this information that you needed to go to the doctor, right? You're waiting for an appointment. You've decided that you can trust yourself to handle it later. So, you're going to move about your day in a different way than being angry, right? What
Hmm.
were the next steps for you in terms of getting the information that you needed from the doctor and then
Hmm.
choosing what you were going to do next? Like, you don't have to get into the specifics of, any of the results, but like,
Sure.
what was that conversation like? And how did you prepare yourself to go into that appointment?
Hmm. I'm very excited to tell you this. And this is about as real as it gets. Okay? We're going to keep it really, really honest here. I went about my day and chose a different path, and I was so proud of myself because, Meg in the past would have just spiraled all day long, right? So I chose a different way to be that day, to trust myself enough to know that we're going to sit in this uncertainty, and that's what we're going to do. So I'm really proud of myself the rest of the day. I'm walking around like, you know what? Wow. Talk about growth. I get a second call from the lab that says you need to schedule an appointment immediately. Okay, I get a second call. All of that growth went out the window one more time, and I very sassily said, "Why would you call me again to make me more scared when I can't get an appointment right now?" And so, long story short, they ended up being able to get me a virtual appointment that day with a nurse practitioner, and they walked me through, the diagnosis and the steps. And I'm very, very grateful that I'm okay. And there's some things that have to happen, but it's nothing that I'm very, very fortunate and privileged that it's nothing that is going to completely turn my life in another direction, right? I'm extremely blessed and grateful for that. And there was so much humanness in that day. And I want to tell that story because it's not like all of a sudden trusting yourself, in my opinion, is a skill, right? It's a skill. It's a close, intimate skill that we have with ourselves that we can choose to have, right? It's a skill that we can choose to develop and nurture because for me, at least, it makes my life way more fulfilling to have a confidence and trust in myself and my voice. And I'm still human, and my growth went really well for a few hours. And it went right out the window again a few hours later. And I shouldn't say it like that because, it's not out the window. It's just that's the practice, right? Like sometimes we get it and we're like, oh, wait, I'm doing the damn thing. Like, here we go, right? I can think of clients like when they're working on a certain skill or when they're processing certain emotions. I know a lot of them will be like, some days I'm like, okay, I'm doing it. And then other days they're like, I'm not doing it. And I think that's just life and growth and any kind of goal that we're working on. And so I wanted to start with that semi-funny story so that just to humanize the path that we truly are also on this with you. We may have had a ton more practice, right? And a lot more nurturing, but we're still human and we're still going to experience all of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I relate to that completely. I think it is important to note that all of the work that you put in that moment when you feel like you've lost it all, right? And you say it all goes
Mhm.
out to the window,
Mhm.
we don't start over completely, right? We just
Sure.
fall back down a little bit and then we build ourselves
Yep.
back up. And, nothing is
Mhm.
perfectly straight up, right? Progress is never perfectly linear. So it's
Yes.
important to recognize that we will have those moments where we fall and we'll never go back to the beginning, right? We will always
Mm.
be a little bit farther ahead than we started last time.
Sure.
So that's really special. And I think that it's normal to get into a situation with, like we said in the beginning, someone with, more education than us, more expertise than us, someone telling us we have to do something in a certain way. It's normal to
Mhm.
feel those feelings of anxiousness and those feelings of fear and
Mhm.
feelings of needing to know all of the answers in that moment. But something that I think that, you mentioned that trusting ourselves is a skill. I think one of the most important skills that we can develop in this area of life is trusting that yes, that person is going to give me more information than I have in this moment, but I can't give all of my power to make decisions away to them. I can't make
Mm,
it so that way I'm only okay when they are telling me I'm okay. That's not how
interesting.
this works, right? Like I don't get to only be okay when someone else tells me that I'm okay. And it's always a
Mm,
balance between, yes, I need that information. I need it to be able to make a decision. I need it to be able to take the next step. But that next step is always up to us. It's not up to
mm,
someone else. And it's so easy to give them the power to always choose that next step for us. And I think that
mm-hmm,
one of the biggest things that we can, the biggest skill we can develop is the ability to take that information and make the decision ourselves. I think that's
mm-hmm.
really important.
That's really, I'm so happy that you highlighted that. I didn't think about it in that way, Maggie, but it makes so much sense, right? Like we rely so heavily. I did, right? In that moment, we rely so heavily on a professional's validation, right? And their almost like stamp of approval so that we can go on and have a good day, right? And it's so complex. And I know that with health in particular, what people may be going through and struggling with, this is going to vary very, very big, right? Like this is going to have a ton of variation depending on your own personal life circumstances. But I really appreciate you saying that with that, there's still always some sense of choice, and there has to always still be a sense of trusting ourselves through those moments.
Yeah, I
Have
think that
you?
that's,
Go ahead.
oh, what were you going to ask?
I was just going to ask you a question if you can recall any time, big or small, that you had to really, dig within yourself while taking the information from a professional in a medical setting or non-medical, you know what I mean, like health related setting to be able to still dig and listen to yourself.
Yeah, the biggest one that comes to mind for me, which I think a lot of people have experienced, is being pushed onto birth control.
Mm,
So a little bit about my experience. I have struggled with acne my whole life, like, since puberty, whatever, 13, whatever.
sure.
And it has always been worse than like I would have liked. And then on top of that, I still experience terrible symptoms when I get my period, like vomiting,
Mm,
nausea, almost passing out. Like, it gets really bad on the first day of my cycle. And so when I went to, and this is not to bash like doctors or Western medicine, anything like that. This is absolutely the opposite of that. In fact, this is just my experience. um,
mm-hmm,
when I would go to a doctor and explain, I'm struggling with acne, I'm struggling with my cycle, their first and pretty much only answer is, okay, we'll go on birth control. And I tried
mm,
that and it didn't help me, right? It didn't help.
mm-hmm,
And so what they want to do is continuously just try you on different ones until maybe you find something that works, right? And that works for a lot of people. For a lot of people, that is the right answer for them at the time in which they're making that decision. And I just had this feeling that it was not the right decision for me. I had tried it. It's not like I was just like, no, I'm just not going to trust that for whatever reason, right? Like I tried it, it didn't work. And I just got this feeling that I wanted to move to a root cause of my symptoms, right? I didn't
mm-hmm,
want to just put a band-aid on it. That just wasn't what I was looking for. And so
mm-hmm,
it's really hard to go to the doctor, ask them for advice, and then tell them no. That's not
mm,
easy, right? Like that's incredibly
right.
challenging. Um, and there were moments where I struggled to trust what I was feeling and push
Mm,
back. And then eventually I got to a point where I was like, no, like I can't do this anymore. This is not working for me. Right. So I
mm-hmm,
had similar experience to you, struggled tremendously to get hormone testing approved. And eventually I decided I needed to find a different type of practitioner. right? So I ended up going to a naturopathic doctor who I didn't have any issues getting any of these hormone tests done with. But that's because that was the right answer for me at that moment. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that everyone should boycott their MD and go to a naturopathic doctor. I'm not saying that at all. It was just the right decision for me at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was feeling those feelings of, this doesn't feel right for me, that's when I needed to say thanks, but no thanks. Right. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to go explore this in a different way. And so that led me to working with them for a couple of years. And then now I'm working with someone completely different who has a background in chemistry and formulating skincare products and nutrition. And she takes a completely different approach. And
Mm-hmm.
I think like the building up of all of the different moves that I have made has gotten me to a
Mm-hmm.
place that I am now where my skin is healing tremendously. I feel much better.
Mm-hmm.
Inflammation has decreased, but it's not something that happened immediately. Like it didn't happen with one decision. It didn't happen when I looked at my doctor and said, no, I don't want to go on birth control. That's not when all of it changed, right? It was a process of continuously having to get information, feel uncomfortable, make a decision, have some of it work for a little bit of time, have to change course again, right? Health is
Right.
not something that is straightforward. We're not going to say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I'm at A, I want to be at B, and this one thing is going to get me there. If that
Right.
happens, that's so exciting because it's so rare, right? Like that's
Mm-hmm.
not usually how it goes. And so for me, it's like, if I expected it to all happen with one decision, I would have never gotten to the place that I'm at because it's just not like that. It's a continuous process where you have to say, okay, you are someone who knows more about this problem that I have. Let me ask you some questions, but I'm not going to default to giving you power
Mm.
to choose the solution to my problem.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
take what you say and I'm going to see how it fits with my experience, my knowledge, what I'm going through at this moment, what I want. And then I'm going to say, okay, these parts align, these parts don't. Right. I had a call this morning with the woman that I'm working with now. And we're going back and forth. And, she's asking me questions. She's saying, okay, I think we should do this. I think we should do this. And there has to be parts where I have to say, yeah, I really like that idea. I think that will help. I'm not so sure about that one. That's not going to work for me with my lifestyle. Right. And the
Sure.
way that I am capable of doing these things. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's something that we have to practice over and over. But the more that we give ourselves the power, the more we trust ourselves to say usually no,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or yes, then it gets a little bit easier every time after that.
I really like hearing you were almost able to give us some in the moment ways that you kind of talk to yourself in your head. Like I was able to get a sense of what some of your inner dialogue might be, right? Even just from your call this morning with the woman that you're working with to help you, I can hear your dialogue saying like, okay, I'm open to that, right? I'm open to looking into that and trying that. I really appreciate your opinion and I want to explore that more with you. And there were certain aspects that you were like, I don't think that one I'm interested in exploring. And that is the absolute epitome of trusting yourself, right? It's not any person, and I'll say this confidently, and I know it's a little bold, but any person who ever wants to put a blanket statement over anything related to health is a huge red flag, in my opinion.
I
We
agree.
are all so different. We are all built so differently, our biologically, mentally, emotionally. I remember my first class in psychology, my professor, who I loved and adore, had said, individual differences trump everything. Like they just trump every single thing in your life. We all have so many individual differences, and I believe that about health as well. And for me, um, it's one of those aspects that when I hear you say it takes practice, that gives me comfort because it means I can get it wrong, right?
Yes.
When there's practice, it leaves room for error. It leaves room for, I'm going to try this and I'm going to see how it lands with me. And then I'm going to go from there, right? And so I'll share this briefly, and mine is, I'm going to go actually more on the mental health side of it because this was a real struggle that I had a couple years ago. That is when my anxiety was at a peak, really extremely intense. And I'm sure we'll go into this in another episode if anybody's curious, what that time really looked like and, kind of moving through it. And it was a very, very difficult season. I mean, difficult to just leave the house and function on a daily basis. That's how elevated I was. And so when I would go to the doctors, of course, an option was medicine. And I had tried one kind of medicine and it just didn't make me feel like myself, right? I had a quote unquote bad experience with it. I kind of felt like a zombie. So instead of feeling anxious, I just felt tired. And I was like, this isn't what I want. I want to feel like me, but less anxious, right? I
Mhm.
don't want to feel tired. And then as soon as it wears off, I'm right back to being anxious again. And so that was a decision within myself that I had to really feel out. But I wouldn't have been able to make that decision if I hadn't tried that medicine at that time. So
Yep.
fast forward, I fought medicine after that because I had a quote unquote bad experience. So I said, forget it. I'm done. That's it. I will white knuckle my way through this and figure out how to do it, right? Which, fast forward, and anybody who's listening who may know more about anxiety, the white knuckling and the doing your way through it is actually usually what keeps feeding the anxiety. Just something I didn't know, and if I could save you any time, the white knuckling and the quote unquote doing is what feeds that anxiety really well. And
Surprise.
so, surprise. And so I'm white knuckling it, and trying my best to just put one foot in front of the other. And I know I'm using a lot of humor today, but it really applies and it feels good sometimes to talk about in these ways. I remember during that season when I was so anxious, just all the time. There were times where it just felt like every day was a panic attack, long, hard, blah, blah, blah. And I remember being envious of anybody drinking their coffee. Like I'd be at work and I know. I hope you giggle from this. It's kind of funny now, but in the moment, I remember being like, I just want to be normal enough to drink my coffee in the morning.
Mhm.
I remember looking around the table and being like, all of you with your cute little Yetis and your nice little coffee cups and you're drinking your coffee, and I feel like I can't have it right now. So I said, okay, I really need to try something else and I really need help, right? I really need help. I've tried everything that I've read, podcasts, I've tried it all, right? I was doing so much. And I think we're going to need to do a whole episode on this in the future. But I finally said, let me try a different medication with someone. So I get on a call with a nurse practitioner and just a virtual call, and she was fantastic. She made me feel heard, seen, comforted. She was conservative with medication in the sense that she was very careful with it. She was very involved, wanted to check in with me often. I felt extremely supported and comforted. And I went on medicine for that time, and I stayed on it for about a year, year and a half, and it saved my life. It completely, in that moment, I needed medicine to start to move through some of the anxiety, and it was life-changing for me. And so that's a positive story of working with a nurse practitioner, someone who does normal Western, medicine. And it was instrumental in my journey as a human being. And I will be forever grateful to her and that medication for that season of my life. So to your point, Maggie, of practicing, right? If I would have just gone with that first experience that I had with medicine and wrote it off and said medicine is terrible, 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 I may not have had this really extremely positive experience that I had for a year and a half that ultimately, in a lot of ways, gave me my life back.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is discernment, right? I'm hearing you
Mm,
say, okay, I had this option once, and the way, whatever, for whatever reason, the factors of it didn't align, right? And now I'm being presented with this option again in a slightly different way. It's packaged differently. I'm looking at it from a different angle, right? Now it works for me. And
mm,
that's so important to, like you said, not make black and white judgments about things, because just as many like there's just as many outside factors that can change as personal factors that vary, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, even just you and I, because we're different people, we're going to have different experiences, even if we're in a similar situation. But the outside factors also change, right? So, your first experience with the medication is different than the second experience of being offered it, which is different
Mm-hmm.
from the third experience of being offered it, regardless of the fact, yes, of course, you changed in that time, but the outside factors of it also changed. And so it
Mm-hmm.
was presented to you in a way that worked better. And that's so important because you could have, like you said, just said, nope, I'm never taking medicine for my mental health again because one time it was bad. And it's
Right.
really easy to do that because making a decision like that is very protective, right? We are
Right.
protecting ourselves from
Mm.
something that potentially put us in danger before. And the only way to break that is to have trust, right? Is to have
Mm.
trust in ourselves and to be able to say, oh, I'm the one that gets to make the decision, right? I'm the one
Mm.
that gets to try this and see how it goes. And I have the ability to try it and say no again, right? I could say no
Mm-hmm.
again, or maybe it'll work out, which is what happened for you, right? You were like, okay, this
Mm-hmm.
is the time, and it all worked out. But if you never gave yourself the opportunity to try again, then you wouldn't have experienced that.
There's something that you said that was so profound that I really want to stay with it for a minute. Um, I use a lot of IFS. It's called IFS. If anybody's curious, it's just a lens that a lot of therapists can use. It's known as like parts therapy, where you kind of talk about people as parts, right? We all have parts to us. And I noticed you say, Maggie, like it's a protective part of us, right? And so I use that language a lot of times with clients, and it can be really helpful to understand ourselves and try and grow or process whatever we may be going through. So I really liked, and I haven't thought about it in this way before, but it's so cool to think about. You were basically saying like that protective part of us is there for a purpose. And when we can let that protective part come down, trust and protection kind of go this way. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see me doing weird things with my hand. If you're not watching on YouTube, I'm showing you that as our trust in ourselves increases, that protective part of us can relax a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of times, we keep talking about anxiety a lot, so we're going to just have to dive into an episode. Please let us know. If you're listening and you really want to talk a little more about trust surrounding anxiety or anything, a lot of the emotions, please let us know. Send us a comment, leave a review. We would like to know if you'd want to hear more about that. But that protective part of us shows up with anxiety a lot because it's trying to protect us, right? It's a vigilance that we have. And a lot of times people want the anxiety to quote unquote go away, but a little bit of anxiety is necessary, right? We have to have just enough to where we are protective of certain decisions, right? Maybe I shouldn't walk down that dark alley all by myself, or maybe I shouldn't get in a car with this person, or maybe, whatever it may be, that part of us is important. And as we learn to trust our true selves, that part of us can kind of start to relax a little bit each time because it trusts, I'm using a lot of trust, it trusts that we will make the decision, even if it's scary and hard. And we have grace with ourselves to know that it's never going to be perfect. It's always going to be fluctuating. I love what you said, Maggie, about like it's not linear. It's not like we're starting here, base camp 1, and we're going to slowly climb up this mountain. And by the top of the mountain, we are going to be the most conceited, confident, probably too far of an extreme. We're going to become assholes at the top. That's what's going to happen. We're going to trust ourselves so much that we can't listen to anybody else ever. And then, you have a whole other problem. So I really appreciate that point that you made.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. There's so
Sorry,
many
did the
different
assholes
things I
comment make you laugh?
could say. Well, it's funny because that's our greatest fear. This is like the whole, we could go on for a million more minutes about this, so I will keep it brief. But the whole like humility thing is what keeps it's like one of those things that keeps us from trusting ourselves, right? You're like, well, I don't want to be, rude, or, I don't want to be conceited or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, being conceited and being confident and trusting yourself are very different things, right? So
Mm,
if we play into that fear of, other people thinking something about us, then we're never going to allow ourselves to trust ourselves, because those
mm,
are directly in competition with one another, right? But what I
mm,
wanted to say is that, going off of what you said about the trust and the fear, right? That inverse relationship between the two, are the very smart part of our brain cannot make decisions if the very primal part of our brain, which is where the fear lives, is overactivated, right? We can't
mm,
make complex decisions when our body is in fight or flight. And so it's really
mm,
important that we do, and this is where all sorts of different, like, physical body techniques can come in, or, breath work, meditation, all this type of stuff, to bring down that level of, fear, fight or flight, all of that, to then allow us to make more complex decisions, right? So, oh yeah, we should talk about the science of it one day too. That would be so fun.
please, please. Yes, lead the way on that one too.
Okay, great. I love science.
Yes. And you present it a lot better than I will. I'll buy into things, but then I'm more wordy and like abstract with it. But you would do a beautiful job of explaining that. And you have just now of explaining that it's tying it back to professionals and medical settings. We never want to get to a place, and if you do, I guess that's okay too. But, it can be I used to really take offense when people would be like, oh, you're so full of yourself. Not that people were saying that to me, but just that comment in general, right? That phrase, you're so full of yourself. And I started to be like, well, why not? I would want to be full of myself, full of self, right? Because
Hmm.
when you do parts therapy and you believe in self and truly making decisions that align from yourself, you're full of yourself. You're full of who you are. And that can be a really beautiful thing. And it's important that we nurture that ability while still being able to hear others. So you'll see us post on social media like, it's not that we never want to listen to somebody ever again, right? Doctors, nurses, naturopaths, whoever it may be, um, a lot of times have incredible intentions and a ton of knowledge, and most times, I believe, have your best interest. And they're never going to have as good of an interest in you as you do.
Yes.
So it's one of those dances almost, which I know our brains want that black and white, tell me which way to go, right? We're meaning making machines primally, but it really is a dance of how do we honor ourselves and listen to ourselves while still getting opinions. And just some tangible things, Maggie, I think this might be really helpful. I'm kind of throwing you on the spot with this one because we didn't really prep any answers for this. So hopefully I have an answer for you because I'm throwing out this little segment that I made up on the spot. As I'm talking, I'm like, well, Meg, you didn't really think of this either.
Hit
Um,
me.
I
Let's
want
go.
to I want to talk more like tangible things. So like if one of our listeners is like, "Cool, I'm going to the doctor on Tuesday. How can I tangibly make this work while I'm still learning to nurture my ability to trust myself?" Right? I'm not there. I'm not close enough there yet to feel really comfortable, like it's second nature for me. So what are some tangible things that our listeners can do to start the practice of trusting themselves in a medical setting with people who are of perceived power and authority?
Yeah, this is such a great question. And I'm sure that there are endless answers, but one thing in particular is coming to mind for me. So I want to talk about that. And
Mm-hmm.
this is something that I love when people come to me for like health and fitness advice. I
Mm-hmm.
love when they come to me with questions and notes written down. So
Mm,
this is one of my biggest pieces of advice, and I still do it all the time, especially when over the summer, I was going to the vet a lot with two of my dogs who unfortunately passed away. And I had to write down questions that I was thinking while I was at home doing whatever, right, in preparation for going to those appointments. And I do it with
yes.
myself as well. Um,
Yep.
in the moment, there's so much going on when you're in the environment, and maybe, you're feeling a little bit afraid, or you don't know what kind of news you're going to get. there's so much going on inside that you can't remember what those things are that you were thinking about when
Right.
you were nice and comfortable at home, right? And
Mm.
so what I think is one of the most helpful things you can do is write them down, whether it's just notes, things you want to bring up, questions you have, or maybe it's even just writing a little bit about your vision and what you hope your results will be, right? Like this place that you
Mhm.
want to get to. We can call it like a desired end state, right? It's like, I want to get to this place and feel like this, or look like this, or be like this, or have results like this. And then we can figure out how to get there in the middle, right? But
Mhm.
if I know where I want
Mhm.
to go, then I can figure out what questions I want to ask, which will then help me decipher, is this path the right path for me or not? Right. And so I feel like that's one
Right.
of those foundational things that you can do that will help you
Mhm.
then be able to make those decisions,
Mhm.
and not feel overwhelmed in the moment. The other thing that's coming up is just saying, I want to think about this, right? Like you don't always have to make a decision at that second, right? Especially now,
Mhm.
like you said, you were able to get a virtual appointment. It's a lot easier to talk to professionals now. And so it's easier to communicate with them more frequently. Most of my doctors would
Mhm.
email me, right? Like they would
Mhm.
email me when I had surgery on my nose and my sinuses. My doctor emailed me all the time. If I had a question, I could just email him, right? And so
Mhm.
that was really great. And it allowed me to be able to take in all the information and then sit with it, process it, and make a decision
Mhm.
instead of just trying to figure it out in that moment when I'm heightened and not thinking the most clearly.
Mm. Mhm.
Yeah.
I love that you said that. Those are actually the two that I was going to share. I'll embellish on them a little bit for my own experience, but those are incredible tools and tangible ones. So I'm so happy I put us on the spot. But that's something that I started doing because I would notice when I would go into the doctor's office that I had one doctor who really would take the time with me and all the things because we really knew each other and we had a great rapport and all of the things. But a lot of times when you go to the doctors, especially if it's like a quick urgent care visit or whatever it may be, it's very rushed. So not always, but a lot of times it's kind of like you're waiting, 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 and then it's like, woo, lightning fast. Right? So it's like, hurry up and wait is kind of the phrase. I think that's a military phrase. Um, and a lot of times that's not even practitioners' faults. A lot of
Right.
times the system is not designed for them to have great bedside manner anymore because the volume and the expectation of which they are supposed to perform is way too much. It's just too much. So
Hmm.
I don't want anybody to hear this and be like, it's not their fault. Believe me, I have a lot of friends in the medical setting. A lot of how our system is just built and the mass money making volume of it in a lot of ways. I know that's bold too, but there's a lot of truth behind that.
Yep.
Doesn't make a office visit typically very intentional, right? So having everything written down is really important, but I will challenge myself and I will challenge all of you that it's a technique that I use as a therapist in training, but it's also a technique that you can use just in everyday life. So when you're with somebody who is very boom, 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 let's go really, really fast, it makes you want to go really, really fast. It's just natural. So what I'll do with my clients when they're going extremely fast, I actually purposely go slower. Right? And
Hmm.
a doctor, a nurse practitioner, whoever who's trying to see you, you might feel like, oh my God, they're going to get so annoyed though. Go slow. Read your question slowly and with intention. You'll be very surprised at how that naturally and subconsciously slows down the other person. So I also will make a list just on my iPhone, just something simple, and I do it with the little checkbox ones so that I can actually check it off as they answer my question or hand me my referral. And sure, am I possibly a little more of an inconvenienced patient, right? Because I'm going a little slower and I'm really thorough. Maybe, but I'm also there to get what I need, and then they're not going to see me again for a while, right? And so that is one of the things. And the other thing that I really am big on, just like Maggie said, is never making a decision in the moment. Now, of course, if God forbid, which I pray none of you are in, a season like this or ever have experiences like this, but I know there's some times in a medical setting where things are extremely like you need to make a decision right now, right? But most of the time it's not. And so we have to really take full advantage of that and be able to say thank you for that information. I'm going to think on that and sit with myself, and I will get back to you. And then get back to them with whatever that may be. I was offered recently, just a quick other side note, I didn't have a great experience, unfortunately, the last time I went to a primary care physician. I've moved, and so I'm trying to find a new person, and unfortunately, I just didn't have a great experience. And she recommended something that I didn't want. But I also know and have flexibility with myself to know that, well, maybe just think on it for a minute, Meg. You might want it, you might not want it. So I didn't want my instinct. I noticed myself wanting to say no because I didn't like her,
Mm,
right? And that's a very real example of because I was not vibing with the provider, I didn't want to take anything that she was offering, right? And so I noticed that about myself, and that's why having that ability to just say, I'm going to think on it. If you don't mind just writing it down or, giving it to the front desk, whatever it is, I'll let you know soon, right? And that letting you know soon in this case scenario for me is I won't be back here, right? But I'll take this information to the next doctor that I try and find to see if I can have more rapport with, and maybe I'll be open to it, right? So buying yourself time, I think, is one of the key ways to practice having more trust within yourself.
yeah, I definitely agree with that. And it applies across the board in life, right? Most things are not that much of an emergency. And sometimes it is, and you got to make that decision, but most of the time it's not.
Mhm.
Meg, is there anything that you want to just leave everyone with before we wrap up this conversation?
I do. I want to leave you with so much. I want to give you my whole heart. I'm just kidding. I want to give you everything.
Take it all.
Take it all. Yeah, super healthy boundaries. No. I just want to leave you with this is one of the more difficult places to trust yourself sometimes, right? With anybody who is, I mean, think about growing up, like doctors and nurses and professionals in the medical setting. Like that was like the epitome of like coolness, right? Like that. And in a lot of ways it still is. I'm not saying that you're not cool if, you're a provider or anything like that, but that was ingrained in us for a young age to have really significant meaning. And it does. And it also doesn't mean that you have to abandon self to work with said provider, right? And I'm going to actually like what I just said there. I use the word and the phrase abandon self a lot, that you can still trust your provider, but it's it's a slippery slope of we don't want to abandon self while doing that. So how do we at the same time, and listeners, I want you to hear me very clearly, like it's not easy, and it's a practice and a dance, but that's the one thing I would want to leave you with is thinking to yourself and getting curious on how can I instill trust in a provider that feels like the right one for me and not abandon myself and my own trust and my own beliefs at the same time. And that, I think, if we have that question at the forefront for us, write it on a sticky note when you go to the doctor's, right? Put it on the steering wheel of your car for the way there. Don't look at it while you're driving, but take it in there with you and remind yourself of like, how can we do this dance at the same time? And that's what I try and really focus on. And it does help. You
Yeah.
also might still lose your cool with the lab people every now and again. But for the most part, we remain hinged. Ish.
Ish. There's always an ish, It's always an ish. I love that. I think that I was going to say the same exact thing as, it's never going to be perfect. You will continue to get better, but remember that trusting yourself doesn't mean abandoning from everyone else, right? So especially in this situation, we have to figure out how can we, trust this person who has a lot of education while also trusting ourselves. So I love that so much.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this was a really relevant conversation. I feel like everyone is always going through this. And like Meg said, if you have any other situations that you want to hear us dive into, please let us know. You can find us on social media or just leave a comment on the podcast itself, either through the episode or through a review, because I feel like there's so many other different avenues we could have this conversation around.
Definitely.
But yeah, so this was lovely. Thanks for sharing your story with us today, Meg.
Thank you. And for our listeners, we are so proud of you. We know it's not easy, but each time that you tune in, you're on the journey with us and you're on the journey together to learning how to trust yourself more. And that's really special.
Yeah. So on that
Until next
note,
time.
we'll see you next week. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of You Can Trust Yourself with Meg and Maggie. Our mission is to leave you with encouragement and tools to nurture your ability to trust yourself. If you found this episode valuable, don't forget to subscribe and please share with a friend. Then take a moment to leave us a 5-star rating and review. Your support helps our show grow, and for that we are extremely grateful. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch the episodes. Till next week, lots of trust and love, Meg and Maggie.